Welcome to the podcast, where today's episode is about Pokemon Leaks Aftermath. Welcome to the Deep End, our captivating discussion series, where we dive into the depths of the current Pokemon news and theories. And today we're going to be addressing the recent Pokemon leaks from the data hack that happened back in August. Going to preface this, we are not going to be covering any of the leaks directly. As a small channel, we have chosen to not invoke the ire of Nintendo should they choose to take action on anyone who has been reporting on these leaks. We are going to be discussing more along the lines of the talks that people have been coming out with using machine translations, the potential ramifications of this leak for Game Freak, for the game production, release dates, anything changing, those kinds of things. It's been a lot of talk in the community about this particular issue, and a lot of misconception and a lot of misinformation, and we're hoping to just clear that up a little bit. So let's dive into it. So on Saturday, October 12th, out of nowhere, came information that someone had hacked the Game Freak headquarters and managed to take a terabyte worth of information from their server systems. Other content creators have been reporting on the leaks as they happen, showing pictures, images, discussing stories that have come out, and even some questionable materials from Game Freak, things that were never really meant to see the light of day. And with that came a whole slew of speculation, of assumptions, and in the age of AI, we have also been seeing a lot of people utilizing that, potentially mistranslating much of the content that has been revealed, especially the more questionable content that has come out. To preface everything, even though you think you've heard it all, always take everything with a grain of salt. Understand that first and foremost, the culture and the language of Japan does not translate one-to-one. There are certain phrases and meanings that have a completely different connotation to them, and so what we are seeing may not be what was originally intended when written. So this is one of those times where we definitely need to take a step back and actually get people who understand the language thoroughly, like Pokis Utami, and get their takes on it, because they're going to give you a much more accurate translation than going through, say, Google Translate.
I think the best place to start is the person that hacked into their servers did it through a phishing attack, and someone, I assume, like with the stuff that they've been able to get, was relatively high up in Game Freak, or within the Game Freak hierarchy. And this wasn't just someone trying to get game information to potentially throw little snippets onto 4chan, because various other documents was taken, which includes employee information. So I think that was the focus, and then just releasing this stuff is in an effort to damage the reputation of Game Freak and Nintendo. I don't think that is what is happening, because ultimately I think it's going to sort of hurt them more so internally than externally, because, you know, now that we're seeing these concepts, the ideas that go into building these Pokemon games, I think it's going to foster a better understanding of their design process and why they chose to do something one way instead of the other. There's a lot of cut content, a lot of concept, and I'm sure for anyone who's seen them, I mean, some of the Pokemon concepts are actually really, really unnerving, and brings into question why you would add those certain elements to your inspiration sheets for what you want this to be. Cost type fusion. And
So it's funny because I've been in a company that was hit with a phishing attack, and this caused a lot of issues. It shut down everything for at least 2 weeks, while IT had to basically fixing things so that we were no longer being accessed. As far as the concepts go, and a lot of the things, I'm gonna be fully forward. I have seen stuff, I know people, and so I have been privy to some of the images, and I've seen them, and I think honestly some of the weird more unnerving aspects of things, you have to kind of remember that a lot of Pokemon are based on yokai and the Japanese mythology, and to some extent, maybe not fully Japanese mythology, maybe other mythologies, but they're not cute and cuddly. They never were, and they have to start someplace and then work their way down to making it where it's suitable for a Pokemon game. So you might start off with something really disturbing and then funnel it down to something a bit more digestible, more palatable, family friendly type of thing. I do like some of the other concepts that they have come up with that are out there on Twitter. Some of the beta ideas I think were absolutely stellar. I wish they would have persisted with them, and I would like to know the reasoning as to why they didn't persist with those ideas.
I mean, the Floette beta designs. I mean, I think that's a good example of what you were talking about. Well, personally, I think the beta Floette designs are leagues above the current Floette line's designs. Not saying that Floette's line is badly designed, but just according to what I would like to see, I would take the beta Floette line design over what we actually got.
Yeah, I think the beta Floette looks so much better in terms of what we got, and I would like to know why that changed specifically. There were some other designs as well that were kind of shoved around somewhere, like the beta Charizard, Mega Charizard designs. I'm kind of glad they didn't go with the beta Charizard, but I kind of wish they went with beta Blastoise, Mega Blastoise. I think
For sure.
the Mega Blastoise was an incredibly looking design.
I agree with you, but in the same breath, I do really like the beta Mega Charizard. It's a shame that it didn't return. It didn't make an appearance in some way. But I can understand why they didn't go with that, because to me it looks more sort of Monster Hunter-esque. If anybody's played the Monster Hunter or played Monster Hunter Stories 2, I think that would fit in extremely well with that art style and not the traditional Monster Hunter games.
Like I said, I would love to show these images, but unfortunately we can't. But like some of the other beta information that we've received have been like the alleged diving mechanic for X and Y, for example. And then there's all the Gen 3 beta Pokemon that were released. What was it? Blaziken. The beta Blaziken was hilarious.
The forgotten Latios, brother.
Or the fact that the original starters for Gen 3, it was supposed to be a water rabbit with a floaty.
I kind of wish we got that. No shade to Medkit, but it's one of my favorite lines. But a water rabbit? It's outside, the traditional, if it's a water type, it has to be something that sort of swims or belongs in or around water, and you wouldn't think that a rabbit would be able to fill that role.
It's like they took him out of Gen 3 to put him in Gen 9.
They just fed him a couple of chilies and miraculously changed his type and found his fondness for soccer.
I saw recently on Twitter the reports of Southern Kalos was actually planned to some point.
Yeah, so I'm a bit upset we didn't get Southern Kalos, because for me personally, I feel like although X and Y were very good games, they were sort of missing something, and it's very reminiscent of how now in Scarlet and Violet, we've got that top right area of the map that is still like grayed out and it's got the lines through it.
Yeah, it's wild. We really should also discuss when it comes to the information that was never used. With some of these stories where apparently Typhlosion has broken the internet in one of two ways. There was a form that was released that looks like it was Typhlosion fused with Chestnut somehow. But then there's also this dark story that's been circulating the rounds about Typhlosion and a female person. I'm using vague terms here because I've heard a couple of different stories. One that's really dark, one that is more innocent. And it really comes down to what I was saying before, the translations. If you're using machine translations, it might be associating certain phrases, in specific ways instead of the actual meaning behind the phrase. And so the internet has gone insane with spreading this rumor. And of course, nothing spreads faster than dark stories, dark news. You know, people are more willing to believe a darker aspect of someone or a company before they're willing to believe any benign reasoning behind it. And in this case, because of how the Japanese language works, now my understanding of Japanese is very rudimentary. I know very, like, now I wouldn't even say basic, but I have studied the language a little bit, and I know that there's certain phrases that are said that say one thing when translated but mean something totally different in the context in which it is said. And so without knowing how the meaning changes in the culture, we're making really terrible assumptions based on the literal translation of the phrase as opposed to the actual intent behind it.
Yes, I think that's part of the issue. I think it's not exclusive to Japanese, but certain of speech or phrases don't necessarily translate too well when translated into English or other languages, because things are said in such a way that in that particular language, in this case Japanese, when translated it might not make as much sense or be as complete as it would in its original language, because there's certain connections within that language that make it make sense. Inevitably don't line up when they'd be translated.
I think the best way to go about it is, like, for example, I'm Puerto Rican. So I speak Spanish, and when in Puerto Rico, we'll give nicknames to people. We'll give nicknames to each other, and one of the more popular nicknames growing up that I heard is negro, which translates literally to black. So if if a family friend was introducing me, este mi amigo negro, eres bien bueno. This is my friend Black, he's really good. It has nothing to do with skin tone, it is just a term of endearment that we use. It is given as such, it is understood as such, it is taken as such. However, outside of looking in, I'm calling someone black could automatically come off as highly racist. This isn't the case in this particular instance. And I think we have to take this into consideration when we're reading something that's been translated from a different language. Who did the translation? Did they do it as a word for word? Did they change the meaning of what was said to better incorporate the actual intent behind it? And I think that's kind of where things went sideways with this particular information that was leaked, is that someone put it through a translator, didn't take into account the actual meanings behind phrases, and just ran with it, as opposed to getting it verified, getting it checked by somebody who speaks the language fluently, who understands the nuances of everything. And that has actually caused, I think, more damage to Game Freak and the Pokemon Company than the hack as a whole, because people have been talking about this more than other information, and it's something that should be addressed.
I think something else that might not be as equally concerning. I can't say. It might differ from person to person, but there's a lot of fake stuff going around as well. I mean, apparently the person who did the hack or leaked it or whomever it was, did say that they weren't going to release information for, Gen 10 or PLZA, even though they have it. So much so that they have a non-complete PC version of the game. Obviously, they had the PC version for testing purposes. Well, also paired with, I'm sure, a sort of very rudimentary Switch version, just to make sure that it runs all right on the Switch, and then the PC version probably just for testing and stuff. And they said they're not going to leak any of that, along with employee information, which I think, by them saying specifically the employee information, this is what has me thinking that it's more than just trying to get leaks on, information on the games and upcoming games. They said they're not going to leak the employee information. However, they have said, to my knowledge, nothing about selling that information. So I think it might be a way for them to make a bit of money, maybe sell it on the dark web or to data brokers or whomever. But that being said, back to the original point of me saying this before I got myself sidetracked, there is no information about PLZA specifically out there, because the leaker has said that explicitly they wouldn't post it. And now we're seeing a a sort of uptick of PLZA quote unquote leaks from this leaker that's leaked everything already. Not specifically from them, but people saying it is from that person, which I think is very dangerous. Not so much from getting in trouble with Nintendo or Game Freak, because they'll have a look at it, probably say, oh no, this person's just trying to ride the coattails of all this interest that's come out through these leaks, but more so for reputation of the individual, firstly, and also I think it's going to start to breed a little bit of that toxicity back into Pokemon community that, I mean, a lot of people in the community have worked really hard to try and get rid of.
That brings an interesting point. Like I said before, the hack happened in August apparently, and it's been kept quiet until now. Now is when everything's coming out, and something that you should always keep in mind that yes, some of this information has been verified to some extent by people who are generally considered in the know. However, not everything has been corroborated, and just because some of the information that is dropped has been corroborated doesn't mean that all of the information as a whole should be trusted. Everything should always be taken with some level of scrutiny. And I think one of the things that has happened is that we are so starved for any kind of information that we're willing to take all of it as gospel when none of it has really been officially verified. Anytime you see something, always be suspicious of it, because there's a possibility that things might have been altered, changed, or added since the hack by either the person leaking this information or someone who's claiming to also have the files and is trying to ride the coattails of this leak. I think suspicion on everything is very important.
I'm very interested that hasn't happened, because if I was in Game Freak and Nintendo's position, although the hack happened in August and the stuff's only coming out now in October, if they had any sort of trailers or little tidbits for the promotions of PLZA, I would think that they would try and get that out, or at least something out, so that if the leaker were to leak PLZA, because it's not an impossibility. Sometimes people say one thing and they do another, because in this case maybe they see that this is actually garnering quite a bit of attention, more so than what they would have originally thought, so they might leak something for PLZA. So that is always a possibility, and I think Nintendo, the Pokemon Company International, and Game Freak would sort of have a chat and be like, let's release something. That 30-second trailer, just for giving the fans a little morsel, just to get that hype going. And they themselves, although the leak is a very bad thing, I think they could also benefit by just putting something out there. It doesn't even have to be like a 30-second trailer. It could just be an image that they post on their Twitter. It's something that I would have thought they would have done already to try and minimize sort of the harm to the hype, if that makes sense. Because if you see, let's say tomorrow the build that the hack has gets leaked, and it's going to contain quite a bit of stuff.
If you take into consideration, if they drop something now, it's going to corroborate anything that has been leaked that happens to parallel inside of that trailer, which is going to give legitimacy to the leaker and anyone sharing this information. However, by not saying anything, they are kind of stifling the hype train, so to speak. But at the same time, they are also not legitimizing any of the information that is being dropped. So I mean, it's a calculated risk on Game Freak's side for this information, to not post something. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that, because again, I've got my fingers dipped in a few different pools. I'm a stockholder for Nintendo. I'm in the know with some information, and that I'm not at liberty to discuss. I won't disclose to protect the anonymity of anyone else who might be in the same know as I am. That said, or the way that Nintendo and Game Freak are playing this out is interesting. I know there's been discussions of maybe something dropping soon in response to this. Maybe not. It wouldn't hurt, but at the same time, I don't know how much of what has been leaked versus what we're actually gonna get, because even though we should be in the end stages of anything to do with PLZA, and we should be just about somewhere near that same point with Generation 10. I don't exactly know how much of the work can actually be changed at this point when it comes to what's already in the game, what's programmed, what's been talked about and leaked, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally. I do also have shares in Nintendo. It's a bit of a weird one. I mean, personally, I would say, hold your hands up because this stuff is out there. We did get hacked. Take responsibility for it because at the end of the day, I believe this is a training issue, so a staff training issue. The malicious software or must have been hidden in a link, a PDF, an image, or something, and looked as if it came from either a Nintendo employee, a Pokemon Company employee, or a fellow Game Freak employee. And just take responsibility for that. Hold your hands up. Be like, look, guys, this happened. A whole lot of previous game data, some future game data, and some employee information was taken. Because it happened in August, we're now at a point where we've doubled down on training. Our systems are now more secure than they were, and just be fully transparent with it. In my opinion, if you're honest about something happening, instead of just being quiet or denying it or whatever route they want to take, currently they're being quiet. I think that's a dishonesty to both your fan base and your various different investors. And I think it would do them more good than it would bad to just be open about everything that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I can see where that you're coming from with that one, and I have to agree that at least acknowledging the fact that there was a data leak, which they did do, it's just they weren't entirely clear to what extent, and I don't think they actually know to what extent was copied out. I think all of it is still just very broad speculation type of deal. I guess really what it comes down to is, what is Game Freak willing to do when it comes to how secure things are going to be moving forward? I mean, they've been pretty tight-lipped, and this leak was massive, absolutely massive. And I kind of understand where they're coming from. They've already addressed the issue internally to some extent, and I'm really hoping that the employee didn't get canned for this, because at the end of the day, you have to realize there was someone at the other end who was a victim in all of this. It's not some soulless corporation. Someone is a victim. Someone got put in the crosshairs and may have potentially lost their job over this. So even though, yes, there are people who are celebrating the leaks, and even though there are other people who are vilifying Game Freak for mistranslations of stories, let's not forget that someone made a mistake and it cost the company dearly, and sometimes companies cannot let certain things slide. So, we don't know if the person who basically clicked the link and allowed this to happen, we don't know if that person even still has a job. So, how do you explain to future prospects, yeah, I got fired because I clicked on a link and a terabyte of information was stolen from the last company I worked for? I mean, this is a huge story. And to say that you got fired from Game Freak, that in itself is going to basically tell every employer you're the guy responsible for the whole Pokemon hack. That's where the assumption is going to go. And so that kind of brings the fact of, I feel terrible about, to that person who is basically going to be held responsible for it. What happens to them? I would like to know what happened to that person, if they're still even employed at Game Freak. If they are, kudos to Game Freak for keeping them on staff, making sure that they're still okay and everything, that they don't suffer any backlash from this. But if they lost their job over this, then you've got to also keep in mind the aftermath of this as a whole.
Directly goes to, no, they wouldn't have been fired because it's a mistake anyone from the managing director of the company or the guy who was hired 2 days ago could make. But unfortunately, that's not the reality in Japan. Japan, they very black or white, right is right, wrong is wrong. And, in Japan, reputation is king. So if you mess up at, let's say, Game Freak, for example, because it's a very large, very well-known game studio, because it is tied to, the company that's responsible for the highest grossing multimedia franchise in the world, you're going to struggle immensely to get a job. And for Japanese people, that is the reality, because they are so stringent about these things and maybe tend to overreact, as opposed to, where I stay in South Africa and possibly places like Australia, the UK, and America, because things work very differently in Asian countries as opposed to your more westernized countries.
I myself was working in a company that had this exact thing happen where someone hit a link to a phishing attack, and it shut down our company for the company for almost 2 weeks. I couldn't even access my computer when I worked from home, which meant I was out of work for 2 straight weeks. And because of the company I worked for, because of the state that we lived, that they were based in, they didn't have to pay me. I had to use up my PTO for a mistake someone else did, and financially, it was brutal. So I can only imagine the aftermath of what happened with other employees for Game Freak for this. Like, did they close down effectively for whatever time it took them to fix this issue? How did they address compensation, if at all? I'm not versed in Japanese culture, work culture. I don't know. I'm not even going to pretend to know. I can only infer from my own experience. The work cultures are different, the ethics are different. I can't speak for Game Freak. I don't know how they operate. I have no point of reference for that. And so it just kind of, because I went through something similar, my mind just kind of races over to, what about the employees? How did they get screwed over because of this?
I suppose it depends on what happened during both yours and Game Freak's phishing attacks. So I don't know what exactly happened, what was taken, what was done when the company you used to work for fell victim to it. But in Game Freak's case, the fix is simple enough that you reissue session tokens. So you basically just log everyone out, and then you tell them, when you're logging back in, change passwords, or they change passwords. The IT department changes passwords themselves and reissue new passwords. So that, in my mind, wouldn't be more than a couple of days. But again, if there are things that need to be patched, it takes longer. So hopefully it didn't affect the guys too much, because we live in what is currently now a very expensive world. I don't think anybody can deny that, especially with all the fighting and that's going on in the world, that drives prices of everything up. And to have to take, like, for argument's sake, we'll just use the 2 weeks as an example. Losing 2 weeks worth of income is make or break for 80-90% of the world population.
It's a lot. It is a lot, and I think that's something that a lot of people in the community kind of overlook. A lot of people overlooked because of the fact that, ooh, Pokemon leaks, ooh, beta designs, ooh, weird story, and nobody stopped to think and say, ooh, what happened to the employees? Ooh, what's gonna happen now when are things going to be different moving forward with Game Freak when it comes to certain topics? And yes, moving forward, it's going to be different. It's been different for the employees. They've been at it for weeks now. It's something that people do need to remember, that it wasn't just Game Freak that got hacked. It's a whole company of people who might be living check to check, who might not have been working and not been making any money during this time. That's just something to keep in mind as well. A lot of people have been saying that this is going to change the games, this is going to push back the games. I don't think that's the case. I think we're still going to see the games at whatever pacing that they were going to release them at. If anything, they'll probably just be a little bit more polish and scrutiny when it comes to the game, because again, we've seen how Game Freak has, I don't want to say messed up, but we've seen the lukewarm reception when it came to how certain games came out, performed, looked, And so I think with this hack, potentially Game Freak may see the reactions of people when it comes to certain things, certain ideas, and decide whether or not it's something that they're going to want to implement moving down the road. However, anything for Pokemon PLZA, for Gen 10, might already be set in stone. However, Generation 11, that right now is probably still in the early stages, and anything that they're going to see because of these hacks, that's the game it will affect, if anything. I don't believe that people have anything to worry about when it comes to the games as a whole. The production timeline for the next two games, I don't really think there's a worry that anyone really has to. If anything questionable is going to be looked at twice, and they'll probably just go through the next game with a slightly finer tooth comb to make sure that at the bare minimums there'll be a lot less to complain about, because I really think that's where it comes down to. It's when it comes to these games, is what's going to make the bulk of the fan base complain less.
Look, I agree, and I think the Pokemon Company, obviously they didn't know this was going to happen when they announced PLZA, but not giving a definitive release date, it sort of does swing in their favor, because we'll never know it. For argument's sake, the game was supposed to release in July 2025, but they do decide to push it back to November 2025. That is something that we might never know. And it doesn't really, in my mind, make much of a difference, because, again, they didn't give us a definitive, it's releasing on the 31st of February 2025. And yes, before anyone says something, I know February doesn't have 31 days. It was just that I said because I felt like saying it.
Yeah, I think as a whole, I think we're good. I don't really see the need to worry or stress about the next couple of games coming out. I think, if anything, this is just going to alter whatever they do for Generation 11. And, of course, all the securities that they're going to be utilizing most likely will be changed as well. They'll probably be keeping game production on a closed network internally, so that should this ever happen again, that you can't, the files won't be accessed. They'll keep certain sets of servers specifically for game development that can only be accessed through these specific computers, while anything that can go in and out of the building will go through another set of servers that are completely disconnected. It might cost them more money, but at the long term benefits is that it's that they'll actually be able to protect the information from being hacked again. And with that said, brings our episode to a close. What are your thoughts about these Pokemon leaks, the ramifications? Did we miss something that potentially could be a problem? Let us know down below. And as always, take anything you see or hear about these leaks with a grain of salt, and have a wonderful day. Bye.
Ciao, everyone.